So this video is about the basic economic problem, and this is a fundamental topic of microeconomics as a lot of topics revert back to this concept. So the diagram illustrates the problem well. We have limited resources, however unlimited wants. So this causes problems as in the resources cannot cater for our needs or wants. So to begin with, what do we actually mean by resources? Well, to consider resources, I think it's absolutely crucial to look at the four factors of production. So there's land. So land is where we're able to collect and extract resources. This could even include the sea, as we can see in this visual. So for example, other industries could be the agricultural industry, which focuses on the collection of resources in such a way as, for example, arable farming, whereas the collection of crops such as wheat and barley comes directly from the land, and the income for land would be considered rent. And labour. So labour is where we see the population of individuals providing their service to help produce output, and they're producing output for the appropriate market wage, and that would be their income. So as a factor of production, and as a return and a payment for that factory production, it would be considered to be income. And if, for example, a firm is labour intensive, then you'd expect that labour will be one of their biggest factors of production. There's capital. So capital is where we see the ability to purchase man-made assets such as machinery or even factories, fulfillment centres, as you can see in the video, and this helps the process of turning these resources into actual consumer goods. So the income for this capital would be considered to be interest. And finally, you've got enterprise. So enterprise it's related to the characteristics and skills such as risk-taking and innovation to help create new business opportunities. So it may involve producing via new ideas and processes for production. And I think when we consider enterprise, we can think of many famous entrepreneurs that have shown the characteristics and have really boosted productivity within an economy. And I'm going to play you a quick clip from Steve Jobs.
Apple is a company that doesn't have the most resources of everybody in the world. And the way we've succeeded is by choosing what horses to ride really carefully, technically. We try to look for these technical vectors that have a future and that are headed up. And, technology, different pieces of technology kind of go in cycles. They have their springs and summers and autumns, and then they go to the graveyard of technology. And so we try to pick things that are in their springs. And if you choose wisely, you can save yourself an enormous amount of work versus trying to do everything. And you can really put energy into making those new emerging technologies be great on your platform.
These factors of production are becoming scarce. So in other words, they're failing to cope with the demands. And this could be for multiple reasons. We see the basic economic problem. So scarcity is a situation in which the human wants are greater than the available resources. So there is something available in such quantity, but the demand is in excess of possible supply. Thus, because of the scarcity problem, there should be a need for a rationing device to compete for allocating that limited resource. So one example which we've experienced recently is fish stock depleting due to overfishing. So we're trying to cope with the demand by excessively fishing from the sea, but this is depleting certain fish stocks. So we've reached a point of scarcity, whereas the ability to meet these wants is becoming harder and harder.
You know what is so yummy? Sushi. But I hear the delicious bluefin tuna is almost extinct, but who cares? There's plenty of fish in the sea, right? Well, maybe not. Hey guys, Julia here for D-News. Oceans are big. I mean, according to NOAA, oceans cover 71% of the Earth and 99% of its living space. So there's a lot of room in there. I mean, how can us humans even make a dent in sea life? Yet, over the past few decades, fishing returns have been shrinking year after year. It seems we're overfishing our seas. Overfishing is when more fish are caught than can be replaced by natural reproduction in a year. For most of human history, fishing fleets were made up of small local boats, but in the mid-1900s, new technology changed the game. New nets and radar technology allowed for fishing of deeper waters and getting more fish at once. Suddenly, fishing became a big commercial enterprise, and for a while, things were going just swell. Yet, in the mid-1990s, the world got a wake-up call. After 500 years, one of the oldest fisheries suddenly collapsed. In the the summer of 1992, the Atlantic cod stock off the eastern coast of Canada fell to 1% of its previous levels. A moratorium was put in place to allow the cod to recover. Over 20 years later, some studies suggest the cod are slowly recovering, yet some studies show the population is declining. And it's not just cod, it's Pacific tuna, it's sardines, it's Chilean sea bass. Even whale populations are decimated. A recent estimate places the amount of whales killed in the last century at nearly 3 million. One study in the journal Nature estimated that overfishing reduced large fish populations to 10% of their pre-industrial size. It's kind of a domino effect. As one source of fish gets used up, fishermen quickly move on to the next. What's called fishing down. As we deplete the schools of larger fish, we turn to what they eat until we deplete those fish, and so on and so forth. We kind of fish down the food chain. And it's not just fish. Some fishing practices ruin ecosystems too. One of the most popular methods of catching fish is trawling. While it can capture lots of fish, it also does lots of damage. One study published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences found that it removes a layer of sediment, which over time could leave that area barren. I'm not trying to badmouth fishermen here. The UN says that fishing is central to the livelihood and food security of 200 million people, and many people depend on fish as a primary source of protein. So it's clear scientists need a fish for a solution soon. There are already some regulations in place, like fishing quotas, closed seasons, size limits, and the protecting of certain areas. Those help, but it's hard to regulate the open ocean. According to the World Wildlife Fund, just 1.6% of the world's oceans have been declared as marine protected areas. One study published in the Journal of Applied Ecology found that marine protected zones with a mix of zones that allowed no fishing and zones that allowed just a little bit of fishing could be a good compromise for both business and.
So when we have a situation of scarcity in the basic economic problem, a decision needs to be made to prevent the problem from escalating. So there needs to be consideration of what needs to be produced, how it should be produced, and for whom it should be produced. So one way of illustrating these types of decisions is via PPF, a production possibility frontier. To give an example, we have a production of cars and vans. So let's consider an individual company who has a certain amount of capital goods, and at this time might not have perhaps the capital to purchase any further machinery. Now, the machinery is used to obviously produce both the cars and the vans. They have a labour force, which they could recruit for if they had the finances, the ability and the available labour to do so. But at the moment, this is their labour force. They have the enterprise already, which possibly helps create the business, but further innovation can take time and it's not always definite. They've got land, and this is for example, the materials needed to produce the cars and the vans, both likely to be very, very similar. They'll have the stock which they've purchased, and depending on the availability of stock, delivery times, and the actual availability of these resources, this is what they have at that time. So ultimately, all these resources are therefore limited. They only have enough labour to produce a certain amount of goods, they only have enough capital goods and stock of resources for so many goods to be produced, and the company must decide which they should focus on. Is it going to be cars or is it going to be vans? So they have to decide which one is in greater demand and desired by society, as this can then allow them the understanding to allocate resources towards that good. However, it will come at an opportunity cost. So, for example, if this company decided that they were going to produce cars and they moved towards X, that would create an opportunity cost of vans, because now if they're allocating more resources towards cars, they'll have less resources to be allocated towards vans. So this decision is a trade-off. They're trading off on vans for cars at point X. However, the company is producing the optimal amount of either good with their resources as they are operating on the PPF curve. So a production possibility frontier, or a PPC, is a diagram that pretty much shows the maximum combination of goods or services that can be produced in a set period of time, given the available resources. So in the last diagram, it was cars and vans. Now, what the PPC allows to see in terms of a visual representation is what should be the resource allocation, or how many resources they allocate into a certain good. It allows you to see possible scarcity issues, because clearly that if there is a limited productive potential, that means going beyond that is impossible to do because of the scarcity at that specific time. The opportunity cost and the trade-off, so it allows you again to calculate what the opportunity cost is depending on the actions of the firm or the economy. It allows the company to see if they're or the economy to see if they're operating at a productive, efficient point, and if there's any unemployment of economic resources. And in macro, this is more based on micro, but in macro it even allows you to identify economic growth. When we consider the following situation of consumer goods, for example, the cars, and the capital goods, so the machinery to produce those cars, the economy has that choice. What should they utilise resources to? The capital goods or the consumer goods, or potentially both. But whatever the decision, there's going to be an opportunity cost due to the basic economic problem. So let's have a look at this question here. So they opted to allocate all resources towards consumer goods with the units of 42 million. Then it means there would be no resources at all for capital goods. So an opportunity cost of 60 million units of those capital goods. So if the economy opted that capital goods were needed and then started to allocate some resources, for example, enough to produce 10 million units, then we'd start to see now an opportunity cost, but this time for consumer goods, as they can now only produce 40 million units, meaning an opportunity cost of 2 million. And as we can see, the more capital goods they produce, the more consumer goods they have to trade off on, so the opportunity cost increases. So it might be worthwhile now to pause the video and see if you could quickly calculate the opportunity cost. So as I said there, if they go from capital goods of 0 to 10, it means that consumer goods output is sacrificed in terms of going from 42 to 40. So maybe have a look, pause the video now and look at what happens when capital good production goes up to 20 million, 30 million, 40 million and so on. And look at the opportunity cost from the perspective of consumer goods. Alright, so as we can see, when they start producing more capital goods at 20 million units, the consumer goods go down from 40 million units to 36 million units. So we get that in terms of 4 million units of opportunity cost, and as we can see, so on. Allows us to judge efficiency in the economy when focused on the production of these two goods. So for example, is current production, is it productively efficient? If they're operating on the PPF curve, they'll be producing goods and services with the optimal combination of inputs to produce maximum output for the minimum cost. So at point A and point B, they would be productively efficient. It doesn't matter in terms of what output. So for example, at point A, they're producing more output of Y. At point B, they're producing more output of X. The fact that they're operating on the PPC curve, on the production possibility curve, that means they are productively efficient. But if we consider point C, they would be productively inefficient as they're not utilising the resources efficiently to produce at that optimal point. And if we consider D, well, point D is at an output that is not yet attainable. So the consistent production of this good at this point is just not viable. It also might provide an insight into as to whether the production of the goods is allocatively efficient. So for example, if the company chooses to operate at point A, but point A does not actually match the desires of the society. So for example, society actually, they would prefer, their desire would be a greater output of X. By the firm or the economy choosing A, they're being allocatively inefficient because they're not considering the interests of society and their consumers when allocating resources.